Hi class, I'd like to introduce you to my multimedia project where I will cover 3 theories: the panic button effect, Catharsis Theory, and Social Facilitation Theory. Before we begin, let me introduce you to social psychology. When you think of social psychology, think of the ABCs. A for affect, meaning emotion, B for behaviors or people's actions, and C for cognition, meaning thoughts. In social psychology, we study how the ABCs are all interconnected and impact one another. Because social psychology is a science, it's not based on guesses or hunches. We can study theories which are well-supported research explanations for observations and how they are linked together. The first theory I'd like to discuss is the panic button effect, which proposes that when people believe they have the option of controlling or escaping a situation, they have a lesser amount of stress or distress even if they do not utilize their options. This theory, while not altogether too complex, is interesting because it helps explain why people may put up with things. It sheds light on why someone would tolerate something less than desirable. Additionally, the panic button effect contributes to the idea that humans desire freedom and want to control their own lives. The panic button effect goes hand in hand with the self-determination theory, which explains that people feel a need to make choices without external influence, but rather based on their free will. In my own life, I can apply the panic button effect based on a scenario that recently happened at work. I work in a fairly small department with only 7 people, and a few months ago, 2 people went on maternity leave at the same time, and while they were gone, their work was dispersed between all of the remaining team members. While I did experience some stress from the added workload, my supervisor had stated that if I was getting behind in my work, I could inform my clinical directors that I would not be answering emails unless they were urgent and only could work on tasks I really needed to complete. Basically, I was allowed to tell a portion of the staff members that were relying on me that I was not going to be available for the day. This was essentially my panic button. I had the option of setting aside some of my responsibilities if they became too much for me. Even though I didn't end up making the choice to send out a notice that I would not be available for the day, I felt more comfortable bearing through the added stress of the bigger workload because I knew I had the option to escape. The second theory I will be discussing is the Catharsis Theory, which proposes that releasing tension or anger by expressing the emotion has a positive impact on a person because it reduces the feeling of aggression. This theory stems from the idea that anger is like a pressure cooker which builds up over time. It has to be released so that the individual does not explode. Research on this theory proves it false. To reduce anger, one must reduce their arousal levels. However, venting increases arousal levels, which then sustains or even increases the anger. This theory teaches us that screaming, throwing things, breaking things, running, or doing some sort of physical activity is not an effective way to handle or manage anger. I can vividly remember a time where I can relate to the Catharsis Theory. In my second year of college, I was taking a chemistry class and it was extremely challenging. At the end of the semester, I ended up earning a D in the class, which is completely unlike me. I was furious. I had also found out the chemistry professor was put on probation because her class had a much fewer amount of passing students than the average class. I was so angry that I felt I needed to vent or blow off steam, so I went for a long swim, screaming into the water as I swam, my strokes as if I was fighting the water, and I kicked my feet with vigor. After I got out of the water, I did feel some satisfaction from my venting session and a momentary release, but I was still mad. I wanted to go to the professor's office and tell her off. My real-life experience is another example which proves the theory is inaccurate. The only way I was able to let the anger go was by watching some comedic videos with my sister. This was successful because based on the psychology of dealing with anger, I needed to participate in an activity in which anger could not be sustained. The last theory I will discuss is the Social Facilitation Theory, which proposes that people are most likely to elicit their dominant response in the presence of others. The dominant response for an individual could be to perform better or worse, depending on if the task is difficult or unfamiliar, or if the task is simple and familiar. This theory is really interesting to me because it applies to 2 extremes, both enhanced and impaired performance. Additionally, this theory is a quick way to understand how a person perceives their own skill at a given task. I can relate to both sides of the Social Facilitation Theory. In middle school, I ran cross country. Even though in practice, when we were timed, I would perform decently, it wasn't until the actual race that I would do my best. My best mile time was 6 minutes and 36 seconds, which I ran when I was put into the heat of faster female runners in my age group. I was motivated to do better than the other girls, which increased my performance. I can also relate to the other side of the theory, which explains that people tend to perform worse when others are present during difficult, unfamiliar tasks. This is what happened when I was first learning to drive, especially if I was driving somewhere I'd never been. My mom, dad, and sisters would all be in the car quietly watching me drive. Because I wanted to make a good impression, I was worried and distracted, which in turn I made more mistakes. I hope you learned about some really interesting theories in social psychology and can apply them to your own life. Thanks for watching. Bye.